My husband is Dr. Richard Rosenbluth. Richie is a palliative care physician for 35 years. He was the head of geriatric oncology at Hackensack University Medical Center. And our joke is that when he turned 70 and his partner said, "Wouldn't you like to retire?" And he said, "But now I know what I'm doing." So he did not retire, and another community hospital, Helene Medical Center, heard that he was available, and they said, "Hey, we really like a department of palliative care." So he is now palliative care physician, and he's also open to answering any questions you have on that. Palliative care means making you feel better. And it's a great deal. Sometimes you need it to get through to the cure, and sometimes it's when there is no cure, but everybody is supposed to live live as good a life as is possible. So that's what he does. We are Jews. We live in Englewood, New Jersey, where we're part of the Englewood Jewish community and the Greater Bergen County Jewish community. We have a summer home in Bradley Beach, where we are part of the community there. And after what I guess some of you saw what happened yesterday. The idea that you had a Muslim enemy going after not Israel, but children. They did not kill Jewish children. They killed Israeli children. The children they killed were members of the Druze community, which is an offshoot of Islam, and it's a very, very intricate religion, and but they are certainly Israeli citizens. Hezbollah went after Israeli children. They killed, last I saw, it was 11 children. Isn't it? Between the ages of 10 and 20, and wounded, I don't know how many, at least an equal number, 20 were wounded. Who attacks children? Who attacks a school bus? We all know, war is terrible. No one is going to argue that. And in war, terrible things happen. A society can sustain terrible things happening. To an individual family, the loss of a child, whether through illness, whether through an accident, whether through a crime, you tell me, a family that loses a child has a hole that will never, ever be replaced. So we're all ready to say that. I don't care whether we're talking about an Arab family, a Jewish family, a Christian family, a Martian family, for all I know. We're talking about people who love their children, a child dies, and it's an infinite tragedy for that family. But let's talk about society. A society can continue if a child dies of an illness. They can grieve with you, but the society will continue. Accidents, as a society, we can sustain that. We can manage that. We can even manage a society in which children die as collateral tragedy in the middle of a war. How does a society continue? A society that encourages, that praises the murder of children. We're not talking about it happened by accident. We were during World War II, Japanese children were not the targets. What was targeted was the United States had to end the war because 1 million American troops were going to die. It was the only way they could end the war. Children died, tragedy. They weren't targeted, which is why nobody is negating the terrible tragedy that it is. But the society can continue. There can be a vision for the society. How can there be a society that sustains itself when it is sustaining itself by firing on a kindergarten? How do you do that? Before Israel left Gaza, which is another story altogether, but before they left Gaza, you had Muslims, Muslim terrorists, Arab terrorists, attacking school buses. Children blown limb from limb. Children, not soldiers, not targeting a military target, targeting children, targeting schools. Pastor mentioned that Israeli schools have armed guards. The reason for that was because right before the 6-Day War, there was the children. Where were they from? Malot. The children of Malot were attacked. But the school was attacked. Golda Meir was prime minister, and children were killed. I think we had 35 children who were killed coming in and out of school, unarmed children. After that, there became armed guards. We have had the stories that come out from the terrorism makes you want to wonder, how can their society go on? What is the vision? Kind of an iconic cartoon, and it's iconic because it is so truthful, has two soldiers facing off each other with, I guess, rifles or bayonets or whatever. You have a soldier with a Star of David on his helmet, and you have an Arab with the crescent on the other side, and they're firing at each other. The difference is the Israeli soldier has the baby carriage behind him. He is defending the baby carriage. The Arab soldier, has the baby carriage in front of him. He is using the baby carriage because if the Israeli soldier, to get to the soldier, the Israeli soldier will have to kill the baby. What Golda Meir said is somehow, somewhere, we may find it as a society, not the individual families. We may find it as a society to forgive the Arabs for killing our children. We will never forgive them for making us kill their children. The idea that in order to rescue Jewish, and not only Jewish, hostages, Israeli hostages, they had to go into Gaza and you had to fight because the baby carriage is in front of the Arab soldier. There were children, tragically, horribly, who were killed. Nobody is blaming a 5-year-old. Pastor and I have discussed the age at which you look at a troop. What do you say about a 10-year-old who's who has bombs strapped on him? I'd like to think maybe there is redemption for a 10-year-old who has done that. We can still help that child. I wish. But certainly we're not talking about these children. Nobody is sitting here and blaming children. A baby in arms did not say, please go kidnap hostages, please go murder 1,000 people and and do that in my name. The child did not do it. The child abuse that is going on is not at the hands of the Israelis or of the Americans when they come. It's not on our hands. Somebody who puts the baby carriage in front of the soldier, that's who we have to be going after. Who does that? Who hides behind children and says, you can't catch us, you can't shoot us because the world will condemn you? And you know what? They've learned that there is a segment of the Western world, and in 2024, a growing segment, that is doing exactly that. When Benjamin Netanyahu got in front of Congress last week, and he said, this is not a clash of civilizations. This is a clash between civilization and barbarism. The Arabs in Gaza, the leaders, certainly not the individuals, although we know that if there were an election, Hamas would win again in Gaza. the the leaders in Gaza know that the longer they can perpetuate this, the longer they can, I think even former President Trump, candidate Trump said, he said, Israel doesn't know anything about PR. They happen to be exactly correct. It's so funny to me. Who invented advertising? When you look at names of the early pioneers in American advertising, our people. You will find Jews in advertising and in public relations, and we've done great things for everything from Pepsi-Cola to Ivory Flakes. We've done, somehow or other, we never did it for Israel. We never did it for Israel. You had wonderful, idealistic Israeli leaders who said, with good policy, you don't need good PR. Unfortunately, what we have seen is that it takes very clear-thinking people and people who are willing to go and explore the facts to see things clearly, to see what there is beyond the noise. Why the media has taken this tack that they have, we can go on and we can discuss it, and there may be, is there anti-Semitism? Of course there is anti-Semitism. After the Holocaust, anti-Semitism became in poor taste. It went undercover. It wasn't in polite company. It didn't work to be anti-Semitic. It came roaring back in the past few years with a vengeance. What happened after October 7th is something that has got to have been orchestrated by forces, whether we want to be spiritual and talk about what those forces are, whether we want to talk pragmatic and say what they were in military or PR or in world terms. We know that this was orchestrated. When you saw what happened on college campuses and in cities, you know these were not spontaneous demonstrations. Those signs have been printed. People were told what to do. By whom? We don't know. But we do know where some of it is coming from. When we start hearing that Iran has paid and has offered a reward to have former President Trump killed, it should open our ears. Wait a minute. Something is going on here. We know that some of the people involved in these demonstrations are being paid, that they have discovered. These are people who are being paid. They're not students. They're not there because they're believing in a cause. They're being paid, and why not? We saw what happened in Washington when Netanyahu spoke in Congress. If that wasn't a riot, that was a riot much, much worse, with much, much more damage than anything that happened January 6th. And no one is calling what happened last week an insurrection. So somebody is at work on an agenda. I've told Tom and I have talked about it. There is a rabbinic a commentary on the book of Daniel, in which it says, before the Anointed One comes, before the Messiah comes, whether it's the first or second time, there will be clarity. I don't think we can get too much clearer than what we've been seeing this past year. It's almost like they're not even trying anymore to put a positive face. You want to know one of the best? For years, did anybody call it, ever call it, the pro-abortion side? You never heard that. The word abortion is a terrible, terrible word. I'm a journalist. If you say to me, hey, Susan, your work there is an abortion, it doesn't mean you liked it. All of a sudden, we're hearing something we never heard. Pro-abortion. How could anybody be pro-abortion? They used to couch it. Pro-choice. Americans love choice. Give us choice. We're willing for choice. Pro-life. We're all pro. You would hear the most pro-choice person say, I'm also pro-life, and interpret it whatever. Clarity. We're no longer pro-choice. We're pro-abortion. Listen for the words. Words mean something. And they tell us what the thought process is behind it. As I've said to Tom so often, when people like to say not in my name, there's no secret that the majority of the Jewish community for many, many years has been, shall we say, leaning left. We used to say, when Jews fall by accident, they fall left. When they didn't know where else, they were voting left. I think that's changing. It's changing for lots of reasons. One of the biggest reasons is that the proliferation of any, if you were going to look at it in the Jewish community, here and in Israel, by the way, is that religious Jews who take it seriously, who believe that what we're given, who believe that Judaism is more than bagels and lox in the morning, and it's more than we're more than people who manage to find their way into synagogue maybe on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but people who say no, this means something. There is a way of life here. There are rules, there are laws, and there is a philosophy behind it, and it means the way we are going to conduct our lives. It doesn't mean that eating kosher, well, isn't that cute? It means, roast beef and whatever. And that there is a philosophy behind it, which is, it certainly means that what goes into our mouths is every bit, to remind us that it's every bit as important as what comes out of our mouths. And these are the kind of things that people more and more in this country, Jews in this country especially, are paying attention to. There is a proliferation of Jewish day schools, of children who are not going to public school because parents will not put them there, because that is not what the values they want them to have. For a long time, I thought the redemption of the United States was going to come from Christian day schools. I still think that. I still believe that. I am a great supporter in however you want vouchers. Never mind pro-choice when it comes to infants and babies. How about pro-choice when it comes to education? How about saying that we want parents to have a voice in the kind of education their children receive? We want if we're going to talk about having difficulty doing that in the public square, because the government is going to say we're going to label you as domestic terrorists. If you want to say, I'm not particularly interested in my 10-year-old knowing what to do with a banana. I won't go further. How about reading and writing? How about arithmetic? I mean, something. Let's get a curriculum that we can at least say reflects the values that we would like our children to have. And if we're not going to be able to do it in the government schools, then for goodness sakes, we pay taxes. Let us be able to have vouchers. Let us have vouchers. Let us be able to say, because you and I both know that if there were vouchers, if you were given a voucher, and whatever we're going to talk about, I think one of the numbers I've heard so often is we will give a parent, not to be used however you want it, we will give you a voucher to be used for school for $10,000. Now, you can have a school in your home, 6 children, you don't need a license, you're allowed to bring 6 children into your house. That means we're saying to a young woman, you can bring 6 first graders, you get $60,000, you have to use some of it for whatever, it's also a salary, and you teach. One thing I know is if we're talking about normally intelligent children, at the end of that year, we will have 6 children who know how to read. I can't tell you the same will be true in public school. Tom knows better than I. But I know that we need pro-choice when it comes to education. These are the kind, I'm bringing that up because it's the kind of value that you will have allies in the observant Jewish community. Our values are your values. Your values are our values. Exactly how we see the Holy One. whatever the differences are, there is much more that unites us than divides us. Okay. When it comes to anything theological, I'm going to defer to the boss.
I'm far from a theologian, but I want to echo what Susan said at the very beginning of her talk. We're honored and delighted to be here, to be invited here by our good friend Tom. And Tom and I spent at least a half an hour yesterday on the phone, and I did catch the tail end of the sermon. We talked a lot about that. In addition to being a physician, I was raised in a traditional Jewish home, and I went to yeshiva. I went to yeshiva straight through high school. I went to Yeshiva University. Yeshiva is a Jewish day school. A Jewish day school. The Jewish day schools actually would divide it up. It was a very long day. We spent the first 3 or 4 hours in religious studies. We would study scripture. We would study the Mishnah and study the Talmud.
Tell them what they are.
Well,
The oral law.
they're the oral law. And then this second half of the day, we had a full general curriculum. And this went straight through Yeshiva University High School. It was a high school that was part of Yeshiva University. This is many, many years ago. And after that, I went to City College and then NYU Medical School, and then moved in the other direction. But we've maintained that tradition, and one of the major traditions in normative or classical Judaism is continued education. We were known as the people of the book because literacy was literally 100%. People were taught to study, and study was a lifelong endeavor. You never ended your study. So I've been interested in theological matters, and one of the things that Tom and I talked about was I'd be rather than lecture you, I have nothing to lecture you about specifically. Susan does all the lectures and she does all the geopolitical discussions. I have my own points of view about geopolitics, and especially about the frightening rise in anti-Semitism in this country that we so love. And maybe I'll make a few points about that, but I'm certainly open to any questions that you may have about where Judaism stands in relation to a variety of different things. I think Tom was very eloquent in pointing out our disgust at the very thoughts of child sacrifice and the thought of killing children. I think it's almost self-evident that we don't really need to discuss that. The issue of anti-Semitism in this country has been troublesome to us, of course. It's almost as though we had an 80-year hiatus from history, because anti-Semitism is the oldest hatred. It's always been there. You sang a hymn from the Book of Lamentations. Lamentations is a downer, by the way, as a book. It's the book that we actually read on the 9th day of Av, Tisha B'Av, which is a day coming up in a couple of weeks where we commemorate the destruction of the temple. Twice. Destroyed by the Babylonians and then destroyed again by the Romans. But in the Book of Lamentations, which is by tradition was authored by Jeremiah. The prophet Jeremiah is believed in Jewish tradition to have been the author of the Book of Lamentations because he lived through that period. And it speaks about how we are alone among the nations and all the nations hate us. This has been Jewish history. At the Passover Seder, that's the traditional meal and service that we have on the eve of Passover, there is a paragraph where we all say that, and I'll try to translate it, that in every generation there are those who stand up to destroy us.
They rise up against us.
They rise up against us. And the Holy One, blessed be He, saves us. So when it comes to the rest of the world, whether there are 130 nations, 140 nations, all of whom are against us, we recognize that we don't need the 130 nations. We have one, so to speak, person who's on our side. And that's the one who has been on our side since the beginning of history.
We do not hold that Israel or the Jewish people have survived by anything we did on our own, by any armies we raised on our own, by any...
It's by the grace, is it by the grace of
by
God?
the grace
We know
of
that.
God, and nothing else. And anybody who thinks it's different is not paying attention.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But the question is, why is there such anti-Semitism? You've talked about truth, right? As the Christian Bible says, the truth shall set you free. Truth, there's nothing more important than truth. And truth is not determined by a democratic vote. In other words, you can't have 10,000 people telling you that it's nighttime out, and one person says it's day. That person has the truth, and he's right. So when there are hundreds of nations telling us that we are genocidal, or that we care little about human life, and we want to take over the world. By the way, that's interesting. Jews are the only group that have been accused both of being the capitalists of the world and the ones who run all the banks, as well as the communists. That's quite an accomplishment, I have to say. Anyway, we put our faith in God. And God has saved us. He's put us through many trials. Remember, what does Tevye say in the Fiddler on the Roof? He says, we are the chosen people. Couldn't you choose somebody else once in a while? But people don't understand what that means to be a chosen people, or a kingdom of priests. It's not something beneficial. It's an obligation. Our obligation has always been to introduce conscience into the world. We introduce monotheism into the world, and we introduce conscience into the world. Melanie Phillips, the British writer, said that is the kernel of truth behind the anti-Semitism. Why do so many people hate us? Because people want to live a dissolute life. What is so important to us right now? You hear this all the time among the young people now. It's be authentic. The individual matters more than anything else. That's a product of the Enlightenment. We are all who matter. Don't tell me what to do. And along come these Jews and Christians who made this not only a Jewish value, but a Judeo-Christian value. And they're saying to us, no, there is a higher law. There's a way in which you're supposed to live your life. You have responsibility. Freedom doesn't exist without responsibility. And they hate us for it. They hate us for it. One other reason, of course, is, I don't have to explain to you what wokeism is. But in the woke ideology, what do people compete for? They compete for victimology, right? We have a pyramid, and every victim group would like to be at the top. So they're constantly fighting. Unfortunately, you have blacks fighting Hispanics, fighting women, fighting LGBTQ plus something else. Everyone wants to be the victim because the victim is idolized, and the oppressor is actually the evil one. Who historically is the greatest victim of all? Jews have been victimized. We have been victimized always. The joke used to be that Europe never forgave the Jews for the Holocaust. Why? Because it just crystallized in people's minds who the real victims are. So they hate us because we're at the top of the victim. Listen, we don't want to be there. We're not thrilled at that. But we can handle it. We can handle it because we have our faith, we have God on our side.
And lots of good friends.
And lots of good friends. As a matter of fact, I'm delighted to be here today. I don't know whether you folks realize that there is, Reverend Hagee has I don't have to tell you who Reverend Hagee is, do I?
Oh, my.
Tom? Who what?
They don't know who Reverend Hagee is?
Not exactly our tradition.
Oh, he's not, well, but he's an evangelical.
Yes.
I don't know what his. This is not my theology. He's a member. He is the pastor of evangelical movement. Has been a strong supporter of Israel. Has been to Israel dozens and dozens of times. They have. He has a large consortium now of Christians supporting Israel coming to Washington D.C. today and tomorrow. Unfortunately, we couldn't go. But when we see that, we see the outpouring of affection and support. It tells us that the average person in this country is very unique. We are a nation unlike any other nation, and the people in this country are good, decent people. The average person in this country, good, decent people who want to work hard, believe in God, share what we like to refer to as Judeo-Christian values, and know that as Susan said, the differences are far overshadowed by those things that unite us. So I think Susan and I will be.
Any questions? We're happy. Anybody have anything
We don't like to lecture. We like to answer questions. If you
Yes.
have
The Bible says, our Bible says, Jesus says, no one comes to the Father but through me. How do you get to heaven?
It's very interesting. And Tom and I, we talked about that yesterday also. Judaism is not an evangelical religion. Traditionally, we have never sought converts. As a matter of fact, in the rabbinic tradition, should someone come to us and ask to be a convert, we try to dissuade him.
You don't have to be.
And the reason is very simple. According to the Jewish tradition, non-Jews who abide by a code of law, which we would call a moral code, have every entree to the world to come and God's grace as a Jew does. So our argument is, why would you want to burden yourself with all of these requirements and laws and regulations that Jews are bound by when you don't have to? So we actually try to dissuade people. And our view has always been that a decent monotheistic.
Can you elaborate on the Noah?
Oh yes, the Noahite laws. If you look at in the book of Genesis, when the story of Noah and the ark, at the end, after the ark has come to rest and Noah and and his family come out, God gives them certain rules and certain laws, and we've referred to them as the Noahite laws.
Noah was not Jewish.
Noah was not Jewish. I mean, the first Jew, really, the first Jew was Jacob.
Well, Abraham is the first Jew.
Well,
but we consider Jacob. Can any of you guess why? Why is Jacob considered to be really the first Jew? We've had Abraham.
Well, first of all, because his name was Israel.
Right.
Because God gave him the name
God
Israel.
gave him the name Israel, of course.
And he was also the first of the patriarchs to have only Jewish children. Abraham had Ishmael. Isaac had Esau. They were his children. Jacob was the only one to have Jewish children, so therefore he was the father. He's the first Israelite, the first Jew. But the Noahide laws are very simple. They're basic moral laws. Monotheism and the prohibition against idolatry. That is universal. A law against murder, against theft, and very importantly, a requirement to set up a court system to adjudicate arguments between people. And then there are a couple of sexual offenses.
And you can't pull
Sexual
you
offenses.
can't pull a limb from
Yeah,
a
that's
living animal.
right. The one thing is that a non-Jew is not obliged to follow the laws of kashrut, or what is kosher or not kosher. Absolutely not. But there's one thing that a non-Jew may not do, and that is sever a limb off a living animal and eat it. By the way, we think that never happens, but that's not true. The South American tribes would do that often. They would grab a hold of an animal, cut off a limb, and cook it and eat it. But that is forbidden. And I think Tom made the observation that what that is more than anything else is a law against cruelty. There are other laws against cruelty in the Jewish Bible. I wonder if you can think of which they are. There are two in particular, the fascinating ones. The first is when you encounter a nest, a bird's nest, with fledgling birds. You can take the fledgling birds to eat them, but you must drive the mother away first. You may not take the fledglings unless you've driven the mother away. And the second law against cruelty is the law that has become one of the basics of our kosher law, and that is, thou shalt not seethe the kid in the mother's milk. And that actually occurs 3 times in the Jewish Bible, actually just in the Torah, in the Torah itself, in the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses. It occurs 3 times. It's a very important concern. Now, people say, well, what does that mean? We don't seethe the kid in his mother's milk? Well, could anything be crueler than using the milk of a mother to kill the child, to cook the child? That is the epitome of cruelty. Of course, the rabbis, because they're never satisfied with this simple text, said that it actually means you cannot cook meat and milk together, but it was there 3 times, and it appears 3 times in the Bible. You cannot cook meat and milk, you cannot eat meat and milk, and you cannot derive benefit from meat and milk that is cooked together. And that is why we don't have cheeseburgers.
Someone once, I remember my grandfather, he should rest in peace, who once said, when we were talking about the laws, and he said, he didn't know, he said he remembered his own father telling him it wasn't healthy. So I remember I turned around to him and I said,
very healthy.
everybody who eats a cheeseburger isn't healthy?
Yeah.
He said, no, he said they're strong.
Well, she has
He said, I don't know why it exists.
what she doesn't tell you is that her grandparents were communists.
That's true too.
So religion was
not-
anathema to
it
them.
was not-
On the other hand, no matter how irreligious they became, they could not eat non-kosher food. It was just endemic. But does that answer your question? The sense is, I heard, I think, who was it? I think it was Mike Huckabee, who was once asked something of that sort about, well, does it mean that Jews go to hell because they don't accept the divinity of Christ? And Mike had a wonderful answer. He said, I think that's up to God to decide. There are certain things that we may not understand, and it's up to God to make that decision when the time comes. And I think, I don't know if that would satisfy you.
Right.
But that's why we have different faiths. But the core of what we believe is really the same. We believe in this in a
And the way
God.
we have to conduct our lives.
We believe in a God who created the world and gave us rules and regulations by which we need to live, and gave us a moral code. And ultimately, that's the most important thing.
We believe Jesus did that for us.
Right?
Jesus died on the cross to give us a right to get to heaven.
I understand that.
We believe that he did that.
We believe there are different routes to heaven.
That's right.
That's
I understand that, and we
respect
have
it.
nothing but respect for your belief.
And another question that I think this hate that's coming from the Muslims is Ishmael was very angry that he was thrown out. He wasn't accepted by God. And I guess that's where hate started from.
You know, I remember a number of years ago, I was part of a radio panel, and they were talking about, we were being very, very academic, so we were talking about founding myths of different groups, and one of the women said, yes, it's so interesting that the story in the Bible, our Bible, is of Isaac, you know, the near sacrifice of Isaac and how it was stopped. And for the Muslims, it's an almost identical story, but instead of Isaac, it's Ishmael who was going to be sacrificed. And I remember my answer was, you know, I could almost, if we want to be very academic, I believe the Bible has more power than that, but okay, if we want to be very academic, I could almost accept that. You want to talk about there being two different founding myths. There's only one problem. Ours was about 3,500 years first. I mean, at 3,500 years before anybody was talking about Ishmael, there was the story of Isaac, of Yitzchak.
But actually, our view of Ishmael is very different from radical Muslim views.
Right.
You know, where they may use that story that Ishmael was driven from Abraham's tent into the wilderness with Hagar, his mother. From our perspective, Ishmael is always thought of as a cousin, and if you look at in the story of the Exodus, as the Israelites were heading towards the Promised Land, they encountered a number of different tribes with whom they did battle occasionally. The Amalekites, in particular, the Moabites, the Midianites, they did not do battle with the Ishmaelites. Edom, the country of Edom was the
Land.
the home of the Ishmaelites, and God told Moses, bypass them. We were not to fight them because they're our cousins. And Ishmael himself, yes, there were these arguments back and forth. Ishmael, the Bible tells you that when Abraham died, he was buried by Isaac and Ishmael. Ishmael was enough of a decent son. He came back, he showed the proper reverence for his father, and he buried. That's not true with Esau. Esau did not come back to help bury his son. But you'll see it in the book of Genesis that it says that it's very quickly said, just almost as an aside, that Abraham was buried in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron, where he buried his wife by his son Isaac and Ishmael. I don't know how many of them hate us for that reason, but you know, the devil can cite scripture for his purpose, as they say.
They have a very. If you ever look at some of the stuff that is in the Quran or in the Muslim tradition, it's almost as though when someone said, "Well, what do you think it is that they want?" And I said, "Everything that we have and everything that we hold holy." You go anywhere in Israel where there is a spot that is almost universally recognized as being something from the Bible, an ancient Jewish site. The one I remember was Rachel's tomb in Bethlehem, and it was a very simple tomb. At first, obviously, we know about it because it's mentioned throughout the Bible. There's a voice crying when Rachel is crying for her children when they're taken into exile, and she's told to be comforted because your children will come back. Very simple tomb, and I remember a Muslim telling me, "Oh, no, 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 that's not where Rachel is buried." I said, "It isn't." You know, I don't know, for 4,000 years. No, no. Muhammad had a servant, and he was buried. And I said, "My God." I mean, these were things that were accepted in the, whether this is new or old, I have no idea. There's nothing in the Quran about it being in Bethlehem, but it's obviously something that has grown up. We always grew up knowing that the Western Wall was the only remaining vestige of the ancient temple. It's not that the wall is venerated, it's you go there because it's a remembrance of
The
the
place is venerated.
Right, exactly. And they will tell you that it's the place where Muhammad's horse, or this steed that he took, was tethered. And I'm just like, really? I mean, there's nothing about that in the Quran, but they will tell you that. I mean, Jerusalem, that they're yelling is their holy city and they must have it and Jews should not be allowed. There's no mention of Jerusalem in the Quran. As a matter of fact, Jews traditionally pray facing east here because we're facing Jerusalem. Wherever we are, we're facing east. The Muslims face away from east. They make sure their backs are turned to Jerusalem. I don't know where that. I'm not. They're facing Mecca.
So if they're here, they're facing east.
Oh, all
But
right.
if they're in Jerusalem, they're facing
They're facing west.
Right.
But I mean, Jerusalem is not. But what do they want? They want what we have. They want what you and what Christians have through their tie to Judaism.
Any other questions?
Well, wait a minute. There's a lady. Yeah.
I just have a question. Do you, like, can someone convert to Judaism?
Yes.
And then be accepted?
Yes.
into the-
Not only if a person if a person wants to convert, the first thing that happens is the person is refused 3 times.
And try to be and dissuaded.
Dissuaded. You don't have to do this. I mean, I have a cousin who converted from she was South African, and when she was 16 years old, she went with a Christian group to Jerusalem. She broke away from the group. She knew that her father, for Jews, in order to be Jewish, it goes through the maternal line.
Matrilineal.
We're matrilineal people. Didn't used to be that way, but after when there's a great deal of intermarriage and whatnot, but they always said no one knew who the father was. We always know who the mother is. So it is now matrilineal. And she knew her father had some kind of a Jewish background, and which was not, there was not that there was anti-Semitism. At 16, she went and she marched herself over to the chief rabbi of Jerusalem. She got to his secretary and said, "What can we do for you?" And she said, "I want to be Jewish." And I mean, go home. Go home, little girl. You don't need this. She came back. She didn't know she was following any kind of ritual. She was very persistent. And finally, I think the 3rd time, the secretary finally said to her, "Why do you want to do this? Why do you, I mean, you're here, you're wonderful. I'm sure you're a wonderful person. You will go to heaven. You don't need to convert to go to heaven. You don't need this." And she said, "I feel that somewhere I have a Jewish great-great-great-grandmother, and I want her to be proud of me." And she...
But to answer your question, a convert is
And she is married to my cousin.
considered
She
a
is-
Jew.
A convert is a Jew. And in fact, you have to embrace the convert and recognize that a convert this is a tough road. This is tough. And yes. But we do not consider it necessary to convert to be a good,
Yes.
holy, wonderful person.
And like, I mean, I know just like in Christianity, there's Catholic and then you break off Roman Catholic, Orthodox, Greek. Same with Judaism, like there's the Orthodox Judaism, even in like New York, their own sects of Orthodox. There are levels to which they,
My prediction is that the way we are going, the Jewish community is going, I think we will be 2 groups. We will be, for want of a better term, let's call observant or traditional Jews, which will go all the way from probably us, all the way to black hats and whatever. What makes us we all use the same prayer book. And in order for there to be a Jewish service, you need a quorum of 10 men. And 10 of these men would be a quorum. They can pray together. They can say all the prayers that you need 10 men for. And on the other hand, we'll have, for want of a better term, let's call secular Jews.
Well,
They're the ones who like-
there are
who
many
like corned
different,
beef.
yeah, there's many different traditions, and many of them are also geographic. Persian Jews have lived in Persia since the time of Queen Esther. Susa in Persia is Shushan of the Book of Esther. They have certain traditions. There are other Oriental, Eastern Jews, Iraqi Jews.
But we can all pray together.
Right, but the thing that's amazing is the Torah, the scrolls, the Torah scrolls are identical, no matter where you are, and that ultimately you can actually pray together. Although the
like their own
intonations and the singing, and there are lots of there are minor differences. Then, of course, you have what we call the ultra Orthodox, and those are the people who are easily identified as wearing black hats. They have the earlocks, usually have beards. They're strict. Let's put it this way: the closest thing that they represent in the Christian tradition is the monastic tradition. They're the closest things to the monastics.
To monks.
Monks, yeah, the monks.
Who else?
Yes.
Quick comment and a question. One, just thanks for being open and candid, like especially with the temperaments of today, or just what's going on recently. It's not an easy thing.
I didn't hear the question.
Two, have you visited Israel? And if you did, when was it? How was the atmosphere?
Yeah,
We have an apartment in Israel.
Yeah.
We have an apartment in a wonderful community called Netanya.
yeah. Netanya it's a marvelous community. There's a rather large Anglo population, the people English-speaking
We
population.
had to go to Israel to
Right.
become Anglos.
Right. Yeah, we're called Anglos. That's Americans, Canadians,
Africans.
South Africans, British. So there's the Anglo community, there's a large French community,
Oh, yes.
and there's a large Russian community in addition to the
And
Hebrew-speaking
a
community.
wonderful
I was
Ethiopian
in Israel. The first time I was in Israel was in 1956. I was 11 years old at the time, and that was literally 8 years after the independence. And I remember sand everywhere. Hardly anything was built up. I spent the summer there because I had cousins, and then we were there in '68.
67.
That was after the war. No, we weren't. The year after the war.
68.
Yeah, a year after the '67 war, we were there, and then we were there in the '70s, and we've been there multiple times. And then we had decided that that as a vacation home, and to be part of the community that we felt so close to, we bought an apartment.
It's also an insurance policy.
Yeah, I keep telling Susan, it says, this is not Germany in 1933.
That is a very,
Right,
very
right,
important
right.
thing.
Right.
You will hear this on television. You will hear, especially non-Orthodox Jewish kids who tell you they're frightened on campus. You don't usually hear it from the Orthodox kids. Who say that they're scared on campuses with the anti-Semitism. And my answer is that this is not Germany in 1933. What is the biggest difference? The biggest difference is that the government and the police
And the people.
and the people are not going after us. You will have this group, but my goodness, the police, even in New York City, the police will protect any Jew walking that they want to come. This group of these people want to come after you. They will protect you. I mean, we have some crazy district attorneys who are letting everybody out, never mind just Jews. They're pushing people onto subway tracks and letting them out of jail. I mean, that's a very different problem.
Yeah.
But the issue in terms of the government being here with us, I can't speak what's going to happen tomorrow. I can tell you that right now, this is not Germany in 1930.
We are still a constitutional republic, and God willing, will remain that.
My goodness.
And as
Even
long as-
Kamala Harris
right.
had to come out and
And
decry what
right.
happened in Washington.
And as long as we're a constitutional republic, we have nothing to fear. No one has anything to fear.
The one
Yes.
thing I don't understand, I've been reading through Deuteronomy recently, and in chapter 28, it says that, as long as you continue to follow my commands,
Right.
the commands of the Lord your God, and walk in obedience, all the peoples on earth will see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they will fear you. And, before, I think it's before that it talks about how, he will bless your land and the rain will fall. That might be after, I'm not quite sure. But, there have been wonderful things. Tom and Kathy in the past had gone to Israel, and, I think she said something about picking up what she thought was a grapefruit. And
No, she thought it was
an orange.
mixed
She,
fruit.
she thought it was. I thought she thought
Yeah.
it was a grapefruit, but it was.
Jaffa oranges
That
have to be
God had
tasted
so
to be
blessed,
believed.
like the rainfall and all that stuff. So I understand, that all this stuff is coming to the very end of time. And I understand that's all God's plan too, but at what point is God going to make those nations fear the Jews? I mean,
Right. Let me,
just the miraculous stuff of like the armies and
Right.
stuff fighting.
The
that
translation-
Jewish army is so small in comparison.
First of all, the translation is a little bit different. The word that we say, to fear us, no one fears us. It's awe.
Oh, okay, so.
It's more awe.
references
We
that.
translate it as fear. I mean, the King James, I love the King James Bible because it's, it's the foundation of the language that's my mother tongue. And it's beautiful. And what it does in the Bible, the way it translates Hebrew is fascinating. But they do make some changes that are not quite
And I
literal
understand
translation.
that,
But
because,
to answer that question,
fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, that's
Right.
the awesomeness. the
it's
reverence
the
of
awe,
the Lord.
being in awe.
But at the same time, if they can see that God has blessed you, I don't understand why there isn't quite.
Because they don't like it.
Yeah.
They don't like it. It bothers them.
But this is the end of days. And Isaiah does also say the same thing, that at the end, Tom and I, we talked about that yesterday. At the end of days, we see, Isaiah speaks of the nations of the world, all the nations of the world, descending on Jerusalem.
In God's name.
And in God's name, in praising God, and being welcomed. That's part of our tradition. That we look forward to the end of days, not where we will beat the rest of the nations, but where the rest of the nations will join us.
In praising
the
God,
love
and
of-
worshiping
in the love
God.
of God, worshiping God, and following His law.
Amen. Yes.
When you were speaking about the top of the pyramid victims, but you're not the traditional victims seeking that attention through being a victim. And don't you think sometimes fear and hate are joined together? That hatred of you is fear?
Maybe. Oh, I think what people fearing conscience. If most of the left in the country, I shouldn't say most, many of them have come through a tradition themselves. They weren't born in vacuums. I don't know, the grandmother, great-grandmother, great-great-grandmother. There was a tradition where there was some kind of a faith tradition. They know what it is, and they rail against it. When people are going to tell you that I am going to be the one to decide if someone is a boy or a girl, I'm going to make that decision. The DNA says no, you can't. I don't care what the DNA says. And if you say otherwise, you're a this or you're a that or you're whatever. And then if you're going to look at people of faith, people who believe in God, and say, it doesn't matter if the Constitution says, if they change the Constitution and put an amendment in that that men have to be recognized as women if they say so, it doesn't matter, because we're saying no. And if you're going to hate the person who says, I don't care what you say. I remember right after the 2020 election, I was asked, I think it was on ABC Radio, they asked me if I was obviously someone who supported Trump in 2020. They asked me if I accepted that Joe Biden was president. And I said, define accept. What do you mean by accept? And he said, well, do you believe it? I said, okay, very different. I believe that the majority in the United States has said that Joe Biden is president. I believe he is president. Are you going to ask me if I accept that it was a problem-free election? I don't. Listen, I don't believe that O.J. Simpson was innocent. I mean, he was found innocent. Do I accept
was
it?
found
Not guilty. I accept it. I accept that that's what the court said. I don't believe it. I thought they were going to go cuckoo. I thought that the person I was speaking to was going to go nuts. Well, what do you mean you don't believe it? I said, you want to get inside my head? You're going to tell me what I have to believe? You can tell me that I'm not raising a revolution. I'm not raising an army to go storming the White House. I'll wait for the next election. I don't believe it was a fair election. Shoot me. That's all. I don't believe it. They would like to. So far, you ask why they, but they're not doing that because I'm Jewish. They're doing that because I represent a group of people who say, we saw it with our own eyes, we saw what happened, we are people who are people of faith, and we say we do believe in there's such a thing as fairness. We see what these people are standing for, and we're saying, no. I don't care if you tell me that this man who is now running in a race with women should be competing against them, and my answer is no, he shouldn't be. Would I let my daughter run in that race? No.
Yeah. I think we share with you a great fear for this country. I think we're at I hate to use the term inflection point, but we're at
An
a
inflection
very
point.
important point in history. And we fear for the future. And what can we do? We do what we can do as far as politics is concerned, and we pray.
And we band
And we pray.
together.
And we band together.
We
work
band together, because if we're together and we stand strong together on the values that we all know are correct, we still will have to fight, but we're much, much stronger than we are if we're alone. Much stronger.
Yeah. There are more of us than of them.
There are.
The Bible warns us about this, that truth is gonna become lies, and lies are gonna become
Absolutely. Absolutely.
truth. Boy, are we not there?
Absolutely.
Well, just one more thing.
Yes, honey.
Sure. You're gonna wrap it up. And this is a political thing, but I'm just curious of the ramifications of it. If Kamala Harris was to choose Josh Shapiro to be her vice president, is that going to cause more problems?
Not for me.
I don't think.
We're not, I don't think it's bloody likely at all. But even if it were,
She has to
Thinking the
appeal.
same thing, but
She
I
has
was
to appeal
just
to the.
curious because, come on.
no, we are not part of tribal politics. There are more Jews in politics that I wouldn't vote for than there are. I was very, very happy to see Vance selected by Trump as his vice president. There were many that I liked very much.
I'm just curious because of his Jewish stance.
My feeling is that
Why he would align himself with her.
he would. I think he.
Politics makes very strange.
And we have watched people in positions like that. If you ever wanted to feel sorry, I mean, I don't really feel sorry for him, but if you could feel sorry, when Netanyahu spoke to Congress, I don't know if any of you got a chance to look at what Chuck Schumer's face looked like. He is a creep, but he was, it was like, he couldn't not be there because he couldn't go back to New York and say, I didn't go. Nadler couldn't go back to New York and say, I didn't go. I mean, these people just couldn't do that. So what they did was they tried to play both ends against the middle. I'll go, but I won't like it. And it's, good God.
Just being Jewish does not automatically mean that they're going to be decent people and be on our side. And as a matter of fact, history has shown that some of the worst and cruelest anti-Semites were of Jewish origin.
There were many among the inquisitors,
Torquemada
and Torquemada had Jewish background.
And
And there were many in the old Soviet Union.
Oh, God.
that
Trust me.
Became communists and.
Trust, oh, please. And there were some, not many, there were some who really did repent. There were some, especially on deathbeds, there were all kinds of things, we've heard all kinds of stories. Why did they go that way? Because after so many years of anti-Semitism and persecution, what they said was, gee, we're going to have a world in which there will be no God, and finally the Jews will be equal. They learned better.